Hi, I'm Erin, and this is the Clothes Erin Sews. My channel is all about sustainable sewing, creative refashioning, and my personal style. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss a thing from me. Today, I'm sharing my 5 must-have sewing tools to make a wearable garment. These are the bare minimum essential tools you need if you're just starting out on your garment sewing journey. In my opinion, you can't sew a garment without these 5 tools, and all other tools could be considered frivolous. Next Monday, I'll be sharing my 5 favorite tools that you don't need, so make sure to come back for that. Today, I'm sharing the tools you do need, but only the tools. You're obviously going to also need notions and materials like thread, possibly buttons or a zipper, fabric, and maybe even some interfacing. Please be sure to stick around to the end of the video because I'll also be sharing one tool that you don't really need, but it's nice to have, as well as asking some questions of you, and I would love to hear your responses down in the comments. So let's get into it. These are the 5 sewing tools I think you need to sew a wearable garment. Number 5. You need a measuring device of some sort. I recommend a measuring tape, and this is to measure your body so you can make a garment that fits you. On the other hand, you could also use a string and a ruler in case you don't have the measuring tape. Just any measuring device and something that is moldable around your body will work. It's important to take your measurements before you make a garment for yourself to know that it will fit around your head, around your body, and be comfortable to wear. Making a guess at this isn't a good idea. You don't have to share your measurements with anyone, although I do on my Instagram, as well as anytime I'm sharing a new garment that I've made. I do share my measurements in the description box just to give you a reference of size. But it's so good to know your measurements. And I also recommend measuring yourself each time you're making a new garment, or at least a few times a year. I keep a note in my phone with my measurements. My body does fluctuate throughout the year, so it is nice to know, where I was at and where I am today, just to know any size adjustments I might need to make to a pattern that I'm working on. Number 4. This is my sewing best friend, and it's my seam ripper. This is a brand new one I just bought from a local quilt store in my town. I'm really excited. It's the first time I've had one with sort of a thicker handle. It's much more comfortable to use than the tiny ones that come with your sewing machine. It's important to replace your seam ripper periodically. I've broken the tips off of many seam rippers, and they also dull over time. They don't stay as sharp. When you have to unpick, you might as well make it as comfortable and easy as possible for yourself. I also don't think there is anyone that is so expert at sewing that they won't need their seam ripper. We all make mistakes. We're not immune to it. The more you think of it as your best friend rather than your most hated enemy, the easier it becomes to undo a seam that didn't work out quite right, or even take something apart that you're no longer wearing in your closet, or maybe you thrifted but need to change it. And that's why I think my seam ripper is my sewing best friend. Number 3. Now we're getting to the stuff that is so essential to sewing garments. I wouldn't recommend doing it without these items. So number 3 is an iron. This is mine. It's a very basic model. I believe it was between $20 and $30. Pressing your seams is going to make your garment look as professional as you would find in a store. It's important to press each seam either to one side or press it open, and that will give you a nice pressed clean finish. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong with wearing a garment that not only you made but also looks like you made. I think there's a stigma around this idea that we're making our own clothes. We have to make them look as ready to wear as possible, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that idea. But your garment will wear over time better, and it will just drape better on your body if you are taking the time to press each seam. Along with your iron, you're going to need something to press upon. I have an ironing board, but I don't necessarily think you need one. I've seen a lot of success just pressing on a folded up towel. Also, I've seen people make their own ironing boards with various materials, a piece of wood, maybe some batting and some fabric wrapped around and stapled to it. So these two items go hand in hand, but like I said, you don't need an actual ironing board to get the job done. Number 2, you will need fabric scissors as well as paper scissors if you're using a pattern to sew your garment. And you need to keep these 2 pairs of scissors separate. This one for paper, this one for fabric. Have you ever tried to cut fabric with just a regular set of scissors that have been dulled over time? It's almost impossible. That's why you need to get your fabric scissors. You need to keep them safe where nobody else can find them. And you need to truly only use them for fabric. It will make your life so much simpler. I know some people might disagree with me and say, you know, it's not that necessary, but I'm a stickler for this one. I have to keep my fabric scissors just for fabric, paper scissors just for paper. Number 1, if you want to sew 2 pieces of fabric together, you're going to need a needle. And this can be a hand sewing needle or a sewing machine needle. Here's some tiny examples right here. This is where you'll obviously need thread as well, but since we're only talking about tools, let's just talk about needles. You can absolutely sew a garment by hand with a hand sewing needle. That's how we used to do it before sewing machines were invented. And I think it's a nice, slow sewing practice. Even if you do have a machine and you like to crank out your garments, something that I want to start doing is always having a hand sewing project going so that I can maybe sit in bed and sew at night or on the couch while we're watching a movie, or maybe even take it traveling, just to have a portable project that I can work on with my hands. It might take longer to hand sew a garment, but I think you'll find that the results are worth it. Also, did you know that sewing machine needles as well as hand sewing needles need to be replaced periodically? Those two can dull. As far as sewing machine needles go, you always need to use the right needle for the fabric that you are sewing. And it's recommended that you replace your sewing machine needle either after one big project or 2 smaller projects. I usually use my needles a little bit more than that, just to get the most bang for my buck. But no matter what, the more you use a needle, the duller it will become and the more problems that you might run into. So I promised a bonus tool at the end of this video. This tool is not something you need to begin your sewing journey or continue with your sewing journey, but it is one of my favorite tools that I do have, and that is an awl. Basically, it's just a very sharp poking device. Some of my favorite ways to use my awl is to use it as a marking device to transfer marks from patterns to fabric. I especially like to mark my dart points with an awl. What I'll do is measure into the dart away from the actual point a 1/2 inch and poke a hole through my pattern and my fabric. And then I know to use that hole to line up my dart and not only sew to it, but sew past it a 1/2 inch. This is something I learned at fashion design school, and I believe it's a technique used in the garment production industry, but I find that it's the quickest and easiest way to do it. I also like to use my awl to kind of like a walking foot to kind of guide my fabric into my machine as I'm sewing. It's a nice way to smooth out the top layer and not get your finger too close to the needle. An awl can also be used to punch a hole through leather. Say you needed to make an extra hole in a belt, you can definitely use an awl. They come in all sorts of different sizes, and they're used in different applications as well. I'm sure that cobblers use them for shoemaking, and I know that they're also kind of can be a construction tool as well. Just be careful with it, don't poke yourself, and you know, sewing can be a dangerous activity, so we just need to be careful with things like this and pretty much everything else I showed you today. So what do you think of my list? Was there something that you disagreed with that you think should be tossed off the list? If so, what would you replace it with? Or if this were a top 6 or a top 10 list, what else would you add to this list of essential sewing tools for your practice? I can't wait to read your comments and suggestions. So thank you for watching. I post new videos most Mondays all about my sustainable sewing, creative refashioning, and personal style journey. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a like, comment below, share with a friend, and subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you're having a great day, and remember, you have to wear something. It might as well be fun and feel great. Bye!